Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into one of the most significant and complex developments in the war between Russia and Ukraine, the situation surrounding Crimea and the strategic implications of Ukraine's latest offensive, which aims to cut off the peninsula. This issue is not just about geography or territory. It's about power, logistics, and the future shape of the conflict. In this video, we'll explore how this development could change the balance of the war, what it means for both sides, and how it affects global security. Crimea has been at the center of the Russia-Ukraine conflict since 2014, when Russia annexed the peninsula in a move that was widely condemned internationally. The annexation gave Russia control over a crucial piece of land in the Black Sea, allowing it to project military power, host its Black Sea fleet, and secure an important logistical hub connecting southern Ukraine to Russian territory. Since then, Crimea has become both a symbol of Russian resurgence and a vital military stronghold. Its connection to mainland Russia through the Crimean Bridge has been essential for transporting troops, fuel, weapons, and supplies to support Russian operations across southern Ukraine. Now, as Ukraine intensifies its counteroffensive, one of its key goals appears to be disrupting or cutting off Crimea's supply routes. This is a bold and calculated move. By isolating Crimea, Ukraine is not only targeting a strategic military base, but also attempting to undermine one of Russia's most important political and symbolic assets. If successful, it would significantly weaken Russia's ability to sustain its forces in the south and could alter the course of the war. But to understand how, we need to look deeper into what cutting off Crimea actually means on the ground. When analysts talk about cutting off Crimea, they are referring to severing the land and logistical connections that keep Russian forces supplied. This involves targeting the Crimean Bridge, the land corridor that runs through occupied territories like Melitopol and Mariupol, and even maritime routes across the Black Sea. Ukraine's strikes on bridges, railways, and depots are designed to choke off these arteries. The goal is to make it increasingly difficult for Russia to transport heavy equipment, ammunition, and reinforcements into the peninsula. Without those supplies, Russian operations based in Crimea could become unsustainable over time. The tactical implications of such a strategy are massive. Crimea's defenses rely on a constant flow of resources from the Russian mainland. If those lines are disrupted, everything slows down. Tanks and armored vehicles need fuel, soldiers need ammunition, and bases need repairs. Russia would be forced to rely on slower, more vulnerable maritime routes across the Black Sea, which are easier for Ukraine to target with drones and long-range missiles. Every delay, every destroyed train, and every intercepted convoy chips away at Russia's operational capacity. For Ukraine, this is not about launching a massive frontal assault. It's about suffocating the enemy's ability to fight effectively. On an operational level, isolating Crimea would allow Ukraine to pressure Russian forces across a wider area. With supplies limited, Russian troops stationed in southern Ukraine, especially in places like Zaporizhia and Kherson, would find it harder to receive reinforcements or resupply. This would weaken Russia's defensive lines, creating opportunities for Ukrainian breakthroughs. Moreover, as Russia scrambles to protect its logistics, it would have to divert troops, aircraft, and anti-air systems that could otherwise be used on the front lines. This kind of strain could ripple across the entire southern front, making Russia's position far less stable. Strategically, the implications go far beyond the battlefield. Crimea is central to Russia's self-image and its geopolitical ambitions. Losing control over its supply lines would be a severe blow not only to its military, but to its political narrative. Since 2014, the Kremlin has portrayed Crimea as an integral part of Russia, a sacred territory that symbolizes the restoration of Russian greatness. If Ukraine manages to isolate or even threaten the peninsula, it undermines that story. It sends a message to both Russian citizens and the international community that Moscow's control is not invincible. For Ukraine, that's a huge morale boost and a way to keep Western allies invested in its cause. But of course, cutting off Crimea is not simple. Russia has spent years fortifying its positions and building redundancy into its supply chains. Even if the Crimean bridge is heavily damaged or destroyed, Russia can attempt to reroute supplies through occupied parts of southern Ukraine or increase the use of ships across the Black Sea. It can stockpile fuel and ammunition inside Crimea to last through prolonged disruptions. In other words, cutting off Crimea is not a one-time strike. It's an ongoing campaign that requires sustained pressure, precision, and persistence from Ukraine. This brings us to one of the most important points: time. Ukraine's strategy depends on maintaining long-term pressure. Cutting a supply line doesn't immediately collapse an enemy's defenses. It's a slow process of attrition. Russia may still be able to operate in Crimea for months, even under partial isolation. However, over time, the logistical strain would become evident. Equipment would wear out faster, resupply would lag, morale would fall, and the cost of maintaining control would skyrocket. This gradual erosion of capability is what Ukraine seems to be aiming for, a strategy that trades speed for sustainability. At the same time, the political impact of this operation could be enormous. Inside Ukraine, any successful strike that weakens Russia's grip on Crimea would be celebrated as a major victory. It would show that Ukraine's resilience and Western support are paying off. In Russia, however, the reaction could be very different. If Crimea, the jewel of Putin's narrative, starts looking vulnerable, it could shake public confidence. It might not lead to immediate unrest, but it would raise questions about the cost of this war and whether the Kremlin can truly protect what it has taken. Internationally, the isolation of Crimea could shift the tone of Western engagement. If Ukraine demonstrates that it can degrade Russia's logistics and threaten its most fortified positions, it strengthens its case for continued support. Western governments would be more inclined to provide advanced weapons and long-range missiles, knowing they make a real difference on the battlefield. It also reinforces the broader strategic objective, showing that Russia's aggression cannot succeed and that borders cannot be redrawn by force. However, this scenario also carries serious risks. Russia will not sit idly by while Ukraine targets its prized possession. We can expect escalations, more missile strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure, renewed efforts to destabilize Ukraine's energy grid, and possibly cyber or hybrid attacks targeting Western supporters. Moscow might also use the situation to justify mobilizing more troops or tightening domestic control. The Kremlin could frame the defense of Crimea as a matter of national survival, which might rally domestic support despite mounting casualties. For Ukraine, the main challenge will be maintaining momentum and resources. Conducting precision strikes, protecting its own logistics, and sustaining an army over months of fighting is expensive and exhausting. The Ukrainian economy remains under immense strain, and Western support, while strong, is not unlimited. If this strategy drags on without visible results, fatigue could set in both domestically and among allies. That's why communication and symbolism matter just as much as battlefield results. Each successful strike, each destroyed bridge or supply depot becomes a message: Ukraine is still advancing and Russia is still bleeding. There's also the humanitarian aspect. Cutting off Crimea affects civilians too. Many residents depend on supplies from the mainland for food, water, electricity, and medicine. Any large-scale disruption risks creating shortages and suffering. Ukraine has pledged to minimize civilian harm, but in war, that's not always possible. This adds another layer of complexity, as Kiev must balance military necessity with humanitarian responsibility. It also gives Russia a propaganda tool, as it can accuse Ukraine of harming innocent people, even though it is Russia's occupation that caused the crisis in the first place. Now, let's think about the broader military balance. If Crimea becomes increasingly isolated, Russia's ability to use it as a launch point for operations in southern Ukraine or the Black Sea diminishes. Its naval presence could be restricted, its airbases less effective, and its radar and missile systems more vulnerable. For Ukraine, this opens new strategic possibilities. It could expand operations along the southern coast, threaten Russia's naval fleet, and even consider future moves toward retaking parts of the peninsula when conditions allow. Each logistical blow moves that possibility from fantasy closer to reality. But this strategy also represents a shift in how Ukraine approaches the war. Early in the conflict, the goal was often framed as reclaiming every inch of occupied land. That remains the ultimate aim, but the path toward it has evolved. Instead of direct assaults on heavily fortified positions, Ukraine is now focusing on making those positions untenable. It's about neutralizing Russia's ability to use its occupied territories effectively. This is what some experts call strategic neutralization. The idea isn't necessarily to win by storming every city, but by making the enemy's gains unsustainable over time. In many ways, cutting off Crimea is the perfect example of that philosophy. It's a long-term strategy that attacks the foundation of Russian power rather than its surface. It forces Russia to spend resources just to maintain control, turning its supposed victory into a liability. Every truckload of fuel that can't reach its destination, every ship that risks being hit in the Black Sea, and every train that gets delayed erodes the stability of Russia's occupation. Over time, this could make it impossible for Moscow to keep Crimea supplied without paying an unsustainable price. Of course, success depends on whether Ukraine can sustain this pressure. That means continued Western support, effective use of new weapons systems, strong intelligence networks, and the ability to adapt quickly to Russian countermeasures. It also depends on maintaining public morale both in Ukraine and abroad. This war has become as much about narratives as it is about numbers. If Ukraine can keep showing progress, even incremental, it strengthens the belief that victory, or at least Russian defeat, is achievable. Looking ahead, if Ukraine does manage to effectively isolate Crimea, several long-term outcomes become possible. 1. Russia's military posture in the south could shift from offense to defense, freeing up Ukrainian forces for other operations. 2. Crimea could become more of a burden for Moscow than a base, a drain on resources that yields diminishing returns. 3. Ukraine might gain a stronger hand in future negotiations, having proven that it can threaten even the most entrenched Russian positions. And 4. The geopolitical balance in the Black Sea region could change dramatically, with NATO and Ukraine working more closely to secure maritime routes and regional stability. But even if Crimea remains under Russian control for now, the mere fact that Ukraine can threaten its isolation changes the dynamics of the war. It shows that Russia's military dominance is not absolute. It also demonstrates the power of strategy over size. Ukraine's approach using precision, patience, and persistence contrasts sharply with Russia's reliance on mass and attrition. This contrast may well define how the war is remembered in the future. In the end, the battle for Crimea is not just a territorial struggle. It's a test of endurance, intelligence, and adaptation. It's about who can sustain their vision longer. Ukraine with its determination to reclaim sovereignty, or Russia with its attempt to rewrite borders by force. Cutting off Crimea's supply routes might not deliver an instant victory, but it could mark the beginning of a slow but irreversible shift in the war's direction. Every disrupted convoy, every damaged bridge, and every logistical setback for Russia brings Ukraine one step closer to changing the strategic map of the conflict. As we wrap up, one thing is clear. The fight over Crimea's supply lines is a battle of willpower as much as weapons. It's about strangling the enemy's lifeline without overextending your own. Ukraine's success will depend not only on firepower, but also on discipline, strategy, and the ability to endure a long, grinding contest. The outcome will shape not just the future of Crimea, but the fate of the entire war. Thank you for watching and staying with this deep dive. If you found this analysis helpful, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think? Can Ukraine successfully isolate Crimea and turn the tide of the war, or will Russia find new ways to hold on? Let's talk about it. See you in the next video.